Good to see you.
So for those of you joining us, I mean, we're right at the start of this series, so no one has got a lot of history on it yet. But the idea with the Hum Insider is really it's come from the sense that I have the great privilege of some amazing colleagues on my team at the Hum. We've been collecting some brilliant people from different parts of the world, and I find them very inspiring. And so we thought it could be interesting to expose some of the internal conversations that we have between us and put them out there in the world because, yeah, I think they're very interesting and hopefully they're interesting to other people as well. Lena is my newest colleague, so we haven't had a huge amount of time to get to know each other yet. The most recent point of contact I had with Lena, I felt like I got schooled, which was really fun.
Hopefully in a
I've
good way.
been, yeah, in a really good way, in a really good way. So I've been, running training workshops for, I think, 6 years now, 6 or 7 years. So it's something that I feel I've got a reasonable amount of mastery in. But yeah, I got to learn so much from you just in the space of 30 minutes about how to support learners in between classes, like how we can use digital technology to create a much more integrated asynchronous experience as a sort of hybrid between the live workshop and the sort of like homework time between classes. So that's amazing. It's just so nice to meet someone else that has all of this knowledge and insight and passion for the craft and to be able to learn from each other. So I'm excited to get to meet you and get deeper into one of your other topics of expertise today.
Okay, yeah.
So I know that you have cultivated some expertise in this topic you call cultural synergy, and that catches my attention and makes my eyebrow go, huh? But I need
Oh,
to know what is that? What's a cultural synergy?
okay, yeah. So for me, it is like literally synergy. Like when can we make you often talk about the rhythm, right? And get that rhythm going. So get that synergy when we are coming from very different backgrounds. And typically we talk about cultural synergy. I think most people are thinking, oh, that's because we come from different parts of the world. We have different passports that we, enter the collaboration with. So we have different national cultures. But when I talk about cultural synergy, it's a broader than that. It is definitely those national cultural backgrounds, but it's also what we maybe more broader can say, what kind of work styles do we step into that collaboration with? And they are shaped by our national culture, but they're also shaped by other group dynamics that have shaped us, right? Like, so that can be different organizational culture, corporate cultures we've been part of. It's typically also very much the kind of educational background that we have, what kind of expertise that have shaped us. Like, I think like a classical example is like, I'm an engineer. I was shaped in that way of solving problems, like and that also then shapes how I plan out a project or how I'm communicating with my colleagues, right? And then there's of course also stuff that's from how we were raised. What kind of role models were there around us? How do we talk to our elders? How do we bring wisdom from other people into our settings? So there's all those layers. So when I talk about cultural synergy, is really to make sure that that plays well, and that means that it's balanced, that we are aware of that, but we also have good habits and techniques to make sure we can pull those different things in as we are together as a group of people. So that's what I mean about cultural synergy.
Right. So it's like the finding how to include our differences so that we're like greater than the sum of the parts, I guess.
Yeah. And I do want to point out that that doesn't mean that it's always like one to one, like, or like everyone is having exactly the same airtime in a meeting, for example.
Yeah.
It because there can be different matter of a part of this is also neurodiversity. It's also how we're thinking, how we're processing. Are we processing very much if we're writing something down on paper? Are we processing when it's ping pong with a big group of people? Are we processing when over time? So I have a great input on this thing that was a challenge for us in 3 days from now, because I've been noodling it, I've been thinking about it, I've been talking to other people about it, and then I'm ready. Like, so it's not about like just that everyone is like 5 minutes eats kind of thing. It's more that we are aware that things comes in different tempi. You were just talking about the asynchronous work, right? For me, the asynchronous practices is very much an inclusive practice as well, because we're stretching some of that, how we're getting our input. Just that we want something immediate, directly, right now, that's already a cultural preference, right? Like, and someone who's very kind of independent, direct in their communication style, very low sense of power dynamics, they're quicker just doing that kind of brainstorm. It might not be as natural for someone else. It doesn't mean that they can't do it, and they also in many situations are fine doing it. But when we're talking about the synergies, to making sure that it's not always the same people who indirectly are setting the agenda of how we are showing up, that we're mixing it up as a group, right? So we each takes turns to maybe be a little uncomfortable or not in our not natural, like most comfortable way. I mean, I think it is about being a little bit uncomfortable and then being comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah.
Where did this come from? How did you get into this?
Oh, I grew up outside of my country as a child a little bit. I'm originally from Denmark. For those of you who can see my last name, it's a very Danish last name. And my name is not Line, but Lena. And part of my early childhood was in Greenland. So I think that shaped a lot. My mom was always super curious about other cultures. So we traveled a lot. And I can see that my video is actually frozen right now, but I'm here. Should I try and stop it, Rich, and get back in?
Sure, just drop out and come back in.
Okay.
I'll entertain everyone with a little song. For anyone that is watching, please do feel free to drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions you've got for Lena, I'll bring them in. Yeah, we're grateful to have an enthusiastic audience with us, and happy to respond to anything that's on your mind. Let's see if Lena is back. She is.
I'm back.
Okay, I got you you were moving to Greenland.
Yes. So as a child, I lived part of my childhood in Greenland. I think that early exposure, but then also a lot of traveling in my youth. So anyway, just to say that has just been my personal life. Like I have lived more outside of my home country than I've lived inside. Probably something that I share a little bit with you, right? I mean, you've also lived in different contexts, like originally from, down under, right? And then, and then I also married someone who's not from the same nationality as me, and raising bilingual children, and my master's is in cultural communication and some, anthropology and some sociology as well. Yeah. So it's kind of linked.
I know you said it's not just about, like your national culture, but also different personality types and work styles and things. But I am wondering, is there anything particularly Danishness? Do you have some particular Danishness that comes with you to work that is recognizable as you come into different teams?
Yes. And I will also say, because I've been away for so long, that I'm Danish, and then I'm not. I mean, I live in the U.S. Today. I'm actually in Copenhagen. I'm in Europe here in October, but so I'm back home, and I live normally on the west coast of the U.S. I don't feel particularly American at all. I do have an American accent, and my kids goes to school there, and but I don't. Yes, there are definitely something that's maybe very typical or Danish that I carry with me, and I think that's I wouldn't say like lack of respect for authority, but more just like everyone should have, even if they're very junior on the team. And even when I was young and did some of my first work in London, I kind of was hit with that of like, why are you speaking up? Why are you thinking that you need your voice or your opinion need a space here. And I think that's a very kind of Danish trait.
Yeah, I think this is something where the Nordics have something in common with people in New Zealand too, in Australia, that there's this attitude of, like, in New Zealand, no one really wants to be presenting themselves as being at the top of the hierarchy. It's sort of like, you want to, yeah, okay, I do have more power than you and I'm responsible here, but we're trying to create the social context where everyone's equal. And it's like there's a very strong sort of set of taboos about not creating a lot of power difference between people, whereas in other cultures, obviously, it's much more straightforward than that.
Exactly. What is interesting, though, in my work, I can see I work a lot with Scandinavians and then people from other parts of Europe or other parts of the world, and I think often Scandinavians, and I don't know if the same with people from New Zealand, they're also a little bit blind that's not only an advantage. I think they have a tendency to be like, that's such a wonderful trait we have. And they're kind of assuming that everyone is it's easy for everyone to go in and do the same as soon as someone from New Zealand or from Denmark saying, oh, just everyone speak up. But it's not that simple, right? Like, we're asking people who have a different cultural background, we're asking them quite a lot to go in and do that, because there's a lot of things that they would like, that seems extremely unprofessional. It probably seems very disrespectful, and they're just not comfortable doing that. So it's not just as easy as saying, oh, but there's room for everybody, just speak up. So that is an interesting, because there is layers of how we are kind of valuing certain behaviors, saying like, oh, this is a good behavior. Like, what wouldn't everyone just
yeah.
this,
right?
My way,
right? My way is the good one.
Yeah, and I think especially when we then, because it's very democratic and we're inviting everybody in, but that doesn't mean that is going to work everywhere, and it doesn't matter that it's good or inclusive for someone else, even though your intention is exactly that. Right? Like, so it is interesting when we start talking about the psychology of when we're navigating between cultures, that we typically judge ourselves on our intention, but the people that are around us, our colleagues, they judge our actions, right? They judge how we're showing up. So even though we are intending to be inclusive or intending to bring these people in, maybe how we're doing it doesn't have that effect and doesn't feel that with among those colleagues, right? So I think that's an important one to be, that we all have the best intentions, but
there's I feel like there's certain, just in my experience, there's some particular traits that really are hotly contested and have different definitions. So like you mentioned in the hierarchy example, that someone might feel disrespected if we're flattening the hierarchy. I really feel like respect and disrespect, that's one of these issues. Like, how do you demonstrate that you respect someone? Is vastly different in different cultures. Like we're here in Southern Europe, and there's an attitude towards time here, which is the respectful thing to do is to be present with someone and to give them the time of day. Like you stay with what's live, and if that means you're showing up 10 minutes late to the next meeting, that's because you're respecting the thing that's happening now. And then you go to Western Europe, and if you're 10 minutes late for a meeting, it's like, where is the respect? Don't you know?
Yes.
It's like
unprofessional. You don't know how to manage your time, right? Yes, exactly. So and actually that's a great example of the dance we always have to do, right? And at the same time, is like, that's part of any group dynamics, like people who have moved in with co-housing with other people, right? Of like, oh, you have these traditions, we have these traditions. People who get married into another family, like, oh, this is how you are celebrating the high holidays, like, or we started a new job, or when we were kids, we started a new school. Human nature is that we're like, oh, how am I supposed to fit in here? And we then do a little bit of that dance, right? And we're good at that. Most people are good at that. and it's part of how it is to be human. So like, how do I fit in here? Like, what am I supposed to do? What flies? What's smart for me to do, right? But of course, when we're collaborating with people over a long period of time, we want to make sure that we're not always like reading, but we're actually like can be ourselves, and they can see us as us, even if, because part of the synergy is not that we're always agreeing and we're just like, you know, like tuned in on the same thing. It's more that we're aware of that dance, and we're all like kind of doing this in that process, and we're also evaluating, giving each other feedback in terms of how it is going, what works, what doesn't work. Like, so, and that's how we're often, you'll hear in this space that people talk about creating like a third culture. It becomes, what is the all the different cultures we bring, and then as we're gelling as a team, what's the third culture that gets shaped as we come together, right? And often with the work that we do in the Hum, right, it's around like collaboration agreements and just being upfront, and then having that being evaluated and discussed and like over time as new people enter and as we evolve as a team.
I suddenly got distracted for a second just thinking about all of our colleagues at the Hum. There's so many like third culture kids involved, you know. That I'm here from New Zealand. Nati's come from Argentina. You've come from Denmark via Greenland via United States. We've got Lana from the Netherlands, but also from the Philippines. Like that, I wonder if that it might even be a one of the strengths that we have in being able to adapt to different teams and different organizations is we're all come from these like multiple cultural backgrounds to like we've learned how to do that translation layer.
Exactly. And my video just froze again, but I'm nodding. And I actually don't think that's a coincidence, actually, when I'm thinking about it. I think there is like, I think there is a radar for people who navigate between cultures, that they just, and I can see it in my kids. I have you know, teenagers, and how they're reading a room with some of those antennas, right? That I think kids who are maybe brought up in more of a monocultural setting don't necessarily have. And again, it doesn't have to be international as such. It can also be people who like grew up in the country and navigating between country and city, or people who move a lot of in between different organizations or different industries, right? Who are like reading that. I'm going to join again so that you can actually see me and I'm live.
Yeah, sure. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, which will be repaired in one moment. Thank you for your patience. Oh, Lena, welcome.
This is super frustrating, but I guess we'll just work with it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. So I feel like I'm starting to get the feeling for what it is that you're passionate about. And like, I think the metaphor that have been using most frequently lately is like, for example, like an orchestra, you know, that we have these, each of us has our own instrument to play, and you don't want an orchestra full of like 67 violins, you know, you really actually do want the differences to play out. And that's what makes it a expressive, you know, innovative, collaborative environment, is that you've got all these differences. Could you say, I'm eager to land this conversation in some like practicalities. Can you give some examples about how does this attitude of trying to cultivate cultural synergy, like how does it actually show up in terms of practices or like specific things that people can do in their day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, I like the orchestra metaphor, and we don't want a certain style or energy to blast out everyone else, right? I also think it's a good metaphor because it can also there can be disconnect, right? It could also be like, wow, we're not really jamming right now, right? So that's what I mean with the synergy. So I think part of the the practices, in my opinion, is to constantly, I mentioned that a little bit before, kind of doing that dance, and often it's there's a curiosity in terms of how we're showing up,
Mm.
so that we keep, instead of shying away from some of those differences. And I think most of us will be like, well, I'm curious about those curiosities, and those differences. It is interesting that when you're looking at research, and also when I do things with groups, both in person and also remotely, I often have an activity around when we're just starting to sharing things with people. What are we sharing? And we're typically trying to find similarities with people, right? If so, it's like, oh, you also went to school there. Oh no, how old are your kids? And oh, you live there. So we're trying to do that because we're trying to mirror. We're trying to find those commonalities. So I think we want to be aware that even though we can intellectualize, and we can also look at research and how powerful the differences are for innovative thinking and coming up with broad, diverse ways of solving problems, there is something in us that's actually not. There's a little scared of that confrontation, and it's more comfortable and easier for us to go link with the things that we have in common. So that's not. So I think that's an important thing. That's part of this, like being curious. But that also means that being good at working in that global setting, or in that setting where there's a lot of different temperaments, we want to be aware that it requires some braveness, so that we feel that we create a language around, why on earth are you doing it this way? It just puzzles me that you are doing it this way, because it's so dramatically different than how I would do it, right? So part of the practicalities is that we create a language around addressing that it's different, instead of kind of sugarcoating. It's like, oh, I'm so curious about that difference, but we're not acknowledging that it actually is hard for us to truly step into it, right? And I think we know that also from the work around working in flatter organization, trying to self-organize. I think we can intellectualize and talk about, why wouldn't you just want that process? But it's hard, right? And it's and as soon as we step into that, there's braveness that's part of that. So in terms of how we practically do it, I think it's a lot around creating a common language, like in both individual awareness, but then also as a group, really mapping out, wow, there's a big range here of temperaments. There's a big range of work styles, and we are willing to have those conversations, and we are naming and seeing those differences that's here, right? So because that makes us being able to actually work with what we are in the middle of, right? And then all of us grow. And a very simple technique that I often share with people, it's not rocket science, but it's around how we're actually asking questions. Both people who are more direct and also people who are more indirect have a tendency to ask questions that just are yes and no questions. So it's like, do you want this? No. Or yes, right? So that means like gives me kind of this information, and I'm seeking it. There is it's a little bit more direct or explicit communicators who would ask for that, but it's something that we all do to one degree or another. And just simply to be aware of how we're asking questions and broadening out how we're asking by what we call open-ended questions, like, why would this not work? Or what are the two components that we should be aware of? Who should I ask for X, Y, Z? So as soon as I'm opening up my conversation, my questions by saying who, what, where, how, when, as I'm opening it up, I'm also signaling to the ones that I'm communicating with that I'm curious, that I'm ready for a dialogue. And I'm also interested in all the nuances that cannot be covered in a yes and a no, right? So I'm signaling, I'm stepping into the complexity. I'm stepping into things that are not just like, yes, we do this. No, we can't do that, right? So already there, it can, and we know this also from nonviolent communication, how powerful it is if we're rephrasing how our observations and how our questions are, right? So this is not like a whole elaborate steps like nonviolent communication, but just opening up our questions, the way that we're asking questions to our colleagues can be super powerful in terms of creating those new habits.
Yeah, it sounds like actually treating someone as a person rather than like a computer. You know, that on a computer you want these yes or no answers, but a person might actually have a lot more nuance going on.
Yeah, but it's also sharing the responsibility. Because if we ask yes and no, we actually say, I just want this. Like, you can just say yes and no, but by saying, I know that there's more to it, please share what the more there is to it, then suddenly we have knowledge sharing, right? Instead of just a transaction. Because now we both know all those nuances that's in whatever we're asked about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just before we wrap up the conversation, I'm curious how do I say it? Like, how would someone notice that they're really lacking this? Like, how does this go wrong? Like, what's the pain when it's not flowing?
I mean, of course, it's a matter of how aware we are and how much we kind of pause once in a while when we are collaborating with people. But what I typically hear from teams that I work with, the reason that they're reaching out is because they're feeling it's just not balanced. It just doesn't seem like, it seems like there are certain parts of the people that's in our team, or even partners we have, or clients where it doesn't, we feel that we're not synced, right? Like there's something that they're holding back, or we're sensing that we're afraid of the conflict because there's such a difference, and then we're just not talking about it, or we're sensing that we're dominating more than we really intend to do, right? So there's just not a balance in the engagement. So I think that's when we often can pick that up, or we can be aware with ourselves. Is there a good balance in the exchange here? Am I hearing nuances from all my colleagues? And again, that's not like equal airtime necessarily, but over a period of time, are these people feeling like they can reach out, either if it's on one, because we also have to then be aware that maybe they don't speak out directly in that one setting, but we have a channel where we know that then showing up when there's a one-on-one, or they send us a Slack message, or when we have lunch with them, then it comes up, right? So a part of that is also that we're having many channels for our communication. We're not just relying on like, oh, when we have our meeting, that's when everything should come up. Like, what are the multiple channels that we gather, that we knowledge share as a team?
With that example of a back channel where someone's contact, that something's not quite going right with them, and then they contact you privately. I'm wondering if you would treat that as like a symptom that something's gone wrong, and that that you could potentially create a team culture that was more open, so they feel more confident to be able to bring it to the group rather than through the back channel. Do you see it that way?
No, I don't. I mean, if it's a constant, then I would say, oh, that it should also, if it's like you're coming to me, but it really is about something else and not me, or not our communication, or not the project that we're sharing. But no, I don't think so. And I think, and that's the interesting thing there, right? That there is a value there that's like, oh, it has to be transparent, and everyone has to be involved in everything. And that's a value setting. If it's shared, the relevance that's important, then it's okay that there is some of these one-on-one, and you feel more comfortable digging deep or stepping into this particular topic one-on-one and not in a group. I think that's okay.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think this is the theme running through the whole conversation. It seems to be about what I'm picking up anyway, is about sort of complexifying your understanding of people and creating more surface area, more different ways of, more interfaces, more different ways that people can come into contact with each other, and diversify the expectations about how people are going to communicate and what they need, and yeah, like I say, be less like computers and more like people.
Yes, totally. Yeah, and it's messy, right? So, and it is interesting because that is some of the my best practices from when we're collaborating remotely as well, as having multiple channels that's part of that engagement. Because when we're working remotely, then we have fewer senses that we're picking up, so those differences in temperament and work styles can really be a hindrance for us in our collaboration.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We're coming up the end of our time now, and before you go away, I would love it if you could say a few words about if someone wanted to go deeper on this topic and dive in with you, what can they do?
I'm gonna unfreeze my.
Yeah. The grand reveal, the drum roll, please. She's coming right back.
Just because I get frustrated with myself being frozen, awkward, less flattering. Well, one of the things that we did in the spring was that we developed a course flow over 4 sessions that we called Cultural Synergy, and had a great group of people back in the spring, and we're doing it again in November. So if any of what we've talked about here, if that resonate with people, that's a place to dive in. So we're having 4 sessions that are remote, a lot of yummy stuff async in the between, and trying to use as many channels as possible, kind of walk the talk of what we just talked about here. And mapping out kind of like, where am I, what are some of the cultural parameters that are important for me. We're also going to talk about what are some superpowers we have, and what if we overuse those superpowers, like, and how can we tone that down? And then also, what are some habits and practices that we can incorporate in our teamwork that we can either tweak in different ways, but that just helps that as we are evolving in our awareness around navigating those cultural dynamics.
Awesome. That sounds really good. I'll direct people to thehum.org if they want to find out more about that course and sign up. Thank you, Lena, for joining me in the second episode of the Hum Insider. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, great conversation, Reg.